Well, hello again. Thanks for joining me. I was going to talk about Babylon, but first, I am going to be talking about how many people does the United States murder with war? War, they call it war. I call it murder. You say tomato, I say tomato. Okay, let me pull up this first article. I have to avoid being tricky. Oh, by the way, I updated my website, so you can go there and click on the list that says podcast links, and you can scroll down that entire list and take a look for yourself. Okay, first, I was looking into Obama to see if Obama murdered more people during war than any other U.S. presidents. And what did I find? Well, I found that murder has certainly been on their mind. Also, remember, I did that show about kill boxes, so go look at that. Murder is a kill box, right? I found a study from U.S. regime has killed 20 to 30 million people since World War II. From a publication called Scott, Sign of the Times, and it will be linked below. After the catastrophic attacks of September 11th, and we all know who did that one, right? Monumental sorrow and a feeling of desperate and understandable anger began to permeate the American psyche. A few people at that time attempted to promote a balanced perspective by pointing out that the United States had also been responsible for causing those same feelings in people in other nations, but they produced hardly a ripple. Although Americans understand in the abstract the wisdom of people around the world empathizing with the suffering of one another, such a reminder of wrongs committed by our nation got little hearing and was soon overshadowed by an accelerated war on terrorism. But we must continue our efforts to develop understanding and compassion in the world. Boy, don't we ever. Hopefully, this article will assist in doing that by addressing the question, how many September 11th has the United States caused in other nations since World War II? This theme is developed in this report, which contains an estimated number of such deaths in 37 nations, as well as brief explanations of why the U.S. is considered culpable. The causes of war are complex. In some instances, nations other than the U.S. may have been responsible for more deaths, but if the involvement of our nation appeared to have been a necessary cause of a war or conflict, it was considered responsible for the deaths in it. In other words, they probably would not have taken place if the United States had not used the heavy hand of its power. The military and economic power of the United States was crucial. This study reveals that U.S. military forces were directly responsible for about 10 to 15 million deaths during the Korean and Vietnam Wars and the two Iraq Wars. 10 to 15 million people that they know of, right? The Korean War also includes Chinese deaths, while the Vietnam War also includes fatalities in Cambodia and Laos. The American public probably is not aware of these numbers and knows even less about the proxy wars for which the United States is also responsible. In the latter wars, there were between 9 and 14 million deaths in Afghanistan, Angola, Democratic Republic of the Congo, East Timor, Guatemala, Indonesia, Pakistan, and Sudan. But the victims are not just from big nations or one part of the world. The remaining deaths were in smaller ones, which constitute over half the total number of nations. Virtually all parts of the world have been the target of U.S. intervention. The overall conclusion reached is that the United States most likely has been responsible since World War II for the deaths between 20 and 30 million people in wars and conflicts scattered over the world. To the families and friends of these victims, it makes little difference whether the causes were U.S. military action, proxy military forces, the provision of U.S. military supplies or advisors, or other ways, such as economic pressures applied by our nation. They had to make decisions about other things, such as finding lost ones, whether to become refugees, and how to survive. And the pain and anger is spread even further. Some authorities estimate there are as many as 10 wounded for each person who dies in wars. Their visible continued suffering is a continuing reminder to their fellow countrymen. It is essential that Americans learn more about this topic so they can begin to understand the pain that others feel. Someone once observed that the Germans during World War II chose not to know. We cannot allow history to say this about our country. The question posed above was, how many September 11th has the United States caused in other nations since World War II? The answer is possibly 10,000. Generally speaking, the much smaller number of Americans who have died is not included in this study, not because they are not important, but because this report focuses on the impact of U.S. actions on its adversaries. An accurate count of the number of deaths is not easy to achieve, and this collection of data was undertaken with full realization of this fact. These estimates will probably be revised later, either upward or downward, by the reader or the author. But undoubtedly, the total will remain in the millions. The difficulty of gathering reliable information is shown by two estimates in this context. For several years, I heard statements on radio that 3 million Cambodians had been killed under the rule of the Khmer Rouge. However, in recent years, the figure I heard was 1 million. Another example is the number of persons estimated to have died in Iraq due to sanctions after the first U.S.-Iraq war was over, 1 million. But in more recent years, based on a more recent study, a lower estimate of around 500,000 has emerged. Other information about wars is revealed only much later when someone decides to speak out, when more secret information is revealed due to persistent efforts of a few, or after special congressional committees make reports. Both victorious and defeated nations may have their own reasons for underreporting the number of deaths. Further, in recent years involving the United States, hang on a second here. Sorry, I have to keep this microphone so close to my mouth, but the way it goes. Okay, so where was I? Both victorious and defeated nations may have their own reasons. Further, in recent wars involving the United States, it was not uncommon to hear statements like, "We do not do body counts," and references to collateral damage as a euphemism for dead and wounded. Life is cheap for some, especially those who manipulate people on a battlefield as if it were a chessboard. To say that it's difficult to get exact figures is not to say that we should not try. Effort was needed to arrive at the figures of 6 million Jews killed during World War I, but knowledge of that number now is widespread, and it has fueled the determination to prevent future Holocausts. That struggle continues. So they have 37 victim nations, and I am just going to go through the list. We have Afghanistan as a victim nation, Angola, Argentina, Bangladesh, Bolivia, big list here. For example, if you look at, let's say, Chad, an estimated 40,000 people in Chad were killed and as many as 200,000 tortured by a government headed by Hassan Habre, who was brought to power in June 1982 with the help of CIA money and arms. He remained in power for 8 years. Human Rights Watch claimed that Habre was responsible for thousands of killings. In 2001, while living in Senegal, he was almost tried for crimes committed by him in Chad. However, a court there blocked these proceedings. The human rights people decided to pursue the case in Belgium because some of Habre's torture victims live there. The U.S. in June 2003 told Belgium that it risked losing its status as a host to NATO's headquarters if it allowed such a legal proceeding to happen. So the result was that the law that allowed victims to file complaints in Belgium for atrocities committed abroad was repealed. However, 2 months later, a new law was passed which made special provision for the continuation of the case against Habre. That's why these things take years and years, and that's why we have key players in all of this, right? We have the United Nations. What do? They file reports. They file reports. That's all they do. They say, oh, look at all these people getting killed over here. That's all they do. All this money, all this time, all they do is file reports, okay? So when you go through this list, you will see that the United States CIA, hello there, Virginia, is fully engaged in all these things. So the death toll is literally impossible to get a handle on because every one of these countries, let's talk about Democratic Republic of Congo, formerly Zaire. The beginning of mass violence was instigated in this country in 1879 by its colonizer, King Leopold of Belgium. The Congo's population was reduced by 10 million people over a period of 20 years, which some have referenced as Leopold's genocide. The United States has been responsible for about a third of that many deaths in that nation in the more recent past. So it becomes very complex when you start going down country by country. In 1960, the Congo became an independent state when Patrice Lumumba began being its first prime minister. He was assassinated with the CIA, hello CIA, being implicated. Although some say that his murder was actually the responsibility of Belgium. But nevertheless, I'm not laughing about his murder, okay? But nevertheless, the CIA was planning to kill him. Before his assassination, the CIA sent one of its scientists, Dr. Sidney Gottlieb. I've talked about Dr. Sidney Gottlieb over and over again. Dr. Sidney Gottlieb was the scientist who invented the MK7. And also there's a Gottlieb relative who was running the FDA and now running one of the big pharmaceutical companies. So they sent Gottlieb to the Congo carrying lethal biological material intended for use in Lumumba's assassination. This virus would have been able to produce a fatal disease indigenous to the Congo area of Africa and was transported in a diplomatic pouch. I'm just amazed that any of us are still alive. Much of the time in recent years, there has been a civil war within the Democratic Republic of Congo, fomented often by the U.S. and other nations, including neighboring nations. In April 1977, Newsday reported that the CIA was secretly supporting efforts to recruit several hundred mercenaries in the U.S. and Great Britain to serve alongside Zaire's army. In that same year, the U.S. provided $15 million in military supplies to the Zairean president Mobutu to fend off an invasion by a rival group operating in Angola. In May 1979, the U.S. sent several $1 million of your tax dollars of the aid to Matuba, who had been condemned 3 months earlier by the U.S. State Department for human rights violations. During the Cold War, the U.S. funneled over $300 million in weapons to Zaire. $100 million in military training was provided to him. In 2001, it was reported to a U.S. Congressional Committee that American companies, including one linked to former President George Bush Sr., were stoking the Congo for monetary gains. There is an international battle over resources in that country, with over 125 companies and individuals being implicated. One of these substances is coltan, C-O-L-T-A-N, which is used in the manufacture of cell phones. So yes, you go through this list, and if I would suggest you do it when you're rested, because it's something else. All of the crime. Okay, let's talk about Iran, okay? Iran, where you can get a free transgender surgery because they're so vicious over there in Iran, aren't they now? Iran lost about 262,000 people in the war against Iraq from 1980 to 1988. On July the 3rd, 1988, the U.S. Navy ship, the Vicini's, was operating within Iranian waters, providing military support for Iraq during the Iran-Iraq War. During a battle against Iranian gunboats, it fired 2 missiles at an Iranian Airbus, which was en route civilian flight. All 290 civilians on board were killed. So if you go country by country, I mean, there really is nobody who got left off the kill list, right? And I'll be getting to, let me get back here. Israeli-Palestinian war. About 100,000 to and this was a couple of years ago. About 100,000 to 200,000 Israelis and Palestinians, but mostly the latter, have been killed in the struggle between these two groups. The U.S. has been a strong supporter of Israel, providing billions of dollars in aid and supporting its possession of nuclear weapons. Yes, and the U.S. just announced a new nuclear bomb. Well, they're just full of lies now, aren't they? I wonder what it's like, because, for example, I've talked in the past that the United States, Washington, D.C., is, in fact, the war arm, right? Where they cook up all the wars. Washington, D.C. What's next to Washington, D.C.? Virginia and Maryland. Virgin Mary. Or Washington, D.C. is the penis, and the Virginia and Maryland people are the balls, right? How does it feel to be the ball on the sack? You guys are really something else, aren't you? They want us to believe all this stuff is real, but I believe the stuff about the murder is in fact real, okay? Korean War. I was born in 1951. Korean War started in 1950 when, according to Truman administration, North Korea invaded South Korea on June 25th. However, since then, another explanation has emerged which maintains that the attack by North Korea came during a time of many border incursions on both sides. South Korea initiated most of the border clashes with North Korea beginning in 1948. The North Korean government claimed that by 1949, the South Korean Army committed 2,617 Army incursions. It was a myth that the Soviet Union ordered North Korea to attack South Korea. The U.S. started its attack before a UN resolution was passed supporting our nation's intervention, and our military forces added to the mayhem in the war by introducing the use of napalm. They wanted a place to go after Vietnam, so they just picked Korea, right? That's how it works, right? They have it all here: Laos, Nepal, Pakistan, Nicaragua, Sudan. Yeah, it really is a who's who that has been murdered by this country, right? Okay, and then I'm going to go over here to Barack Obama. Let me see what I have on him. This leads us into that famous quote by General Wesley Clark. He claimed that 10 days after 9/11, military invasions of Iraq and Libya with several other Middle Eastern countries were already planned and settled beforehand. Now we have the explanation for the Iraq War, the Libyan War, and any of the other wars that are coming in the near future. So, let me see here. I have something on Obama I wanted to read to you because Obama caused a great deal of suffering. And I've said this in the past. I am 100% convinced Obama is, in fact, a made up character, okay? I dug up some more stuff about him the other day. It's just like just crazy, right? Okay, so yeah, they made Obama up. I believe they made him up because they wanted this country to have a black president, right? Because a black guy immediately going into the Middle East and bombing the daylights out of them probably wouldn't seem as bad as a white guy doing it, right? So let me find this file if I can. I think essentially what Obama did was he also made up a lot of stuff, right? Beyond bypassing the Constitution and the War Powers Act, the Obama administration has also adopted a dangerously broad interpretation of the legal right to use drone strikes against terrorist suspects abroad. According to Obama's counterterrorism chief, John Brennan, the legal authority for the drone strikes derives from the authorization for use of military force, passed by the Congress in September 2001 to authorize the attack on Afghanistan. So, Okay, so, so Obama, being a lawyer himself, together with the bland assertion that the U.S. has a right to self-defense against al-Qaeda under international law, these legal arguments have enabled the president to expand drone operations against terrorist organizations to Yemen and Somalia, as well as to escalate the campaign against military networks in Pakistan. To date, Obama has launched 278 drone strikes against targets in Pakistan. The use of drone strikes is now so commonplace that some critics have begun to wonder if the administration has adopted a kill, not capture policy, forsaking the intelligence gains of capturing suspects for an approach that leaves no one alive to pose a threat. The Obama administration quietly released more information on its illegal mass murder via drone program, in which the White House has unilaterally creates a list of people around the world to assassinate without charges, trial, or even a semblance of due process. And these people in this country are always yelling, "We're a nation of laws. We're a nation of laws. We respect the law. The law is what guides this country. This country is a great democracy, greater than ever existed before. We're so rich, and we observe the laws." Yeah, they observe the laws when it is protecting them, right? Okay, so, the latest disclosure was in response to a court order. Among other points, the newly released documents give some insight into the illegal policy behind the murders. Essentially, according to the documents, any suspect Obama wants to eliminate can be executed if there is a near certainty that he or she is present, that civilians will not be killed, and that the murder is supposedly needed to achieve U.S. policy objectives. And this is where we're getting into it now with Gaza, right? Because they're bombing everything, saying, there was one person there, so we took out 500. It appears that even those minimal standards have been waived, as Obama had rained death and destruction down on thousands of people worldwide from unmanned drones. In short, Where was I? Let me see here. So all they have to do is be near certainty, right? That you're present there to go and bomb everybody else. It appears that those minimal standards have been waived as Obama has rained death and destruction from those drones. And this was a good one that I'll close off with here. Incredibly, the White House touted the disclosures as evidence of how supposedly careful and reasonable Obama is when deciding who to murder and how and when to murder them. According to the administration, some 2,500 suspected militants have been murdered, along with more than 100 acknowledged civilians, aka collateral damage. Murder is, of course, the only appropriate term to describe the illegal executions because the victims were never even charged with a crime, much less convicted in a court of law, before receiving the death penalty. None of the assassinations took place on a battlefield pursuant to a lawful declaration of war by Congress. The release of the new information comes after years of leaks, news reports, comments from top officials, and other sources exposed Obama's lawless reign of drone terror. Basically, with no checks or balances and no semblance of constitutionality required due process, Obama has been massacring thousands of people, many of them children, and some of them American citizens, using missiles raining down from the sky. People across Africa, Arabia, and Central Asia have been murdered in the program so far. Obama's victims are often selected based on metadata, according to a former NSA and CIA boss, Michael Hayden, or other flimsy evidence that would never hold up in court. Even Americans are subject to being extrajudicially assassinated by Obama and the CIA system, which one official described as one hell of a killing machine. Perhaps most infamously, Obama. And this is one that just pay close attention here, okay? Obama and the CIA system, which one official described as one hell of a killing machine. Perhaps most infamously, Obama murdered a 16-year-old American boy in Yemen who was searching for his father. His father was also murdered by an Obama drone for allegedly abusing his free speech rights by making propaganda videos. Essentially, Obama has been serving as judge, jury, and executioner, casting aside centuries of tradition holding that everyone is innocent until proven guilty. The establishment media has dutifully parroted the Obama administration line that murder victims are mostly terrorists and militants, with innocent civilians occasionally struck in the crossfire. And they've done things like bombing weddings with drones and all kinds of stuff over there. So that's Obama. And the reason I'm bringing this up, because we're going to be coming into some pretty uncertain times up ahead. And if you think these people are beyond murder, I think you need to really pay closer attention here. Okay, so what I want you to do is this. I like to observe people who are high-level psychopaths, okay? And I'm going to be playing this clip, and I will also put the clip down below. And what these people try to do, because Robert Hare, the so-called researcher for psychopaths, did the exact same trick. They try to act like, well, we're all kind of guilty now, aren't we? And so this is exactly what they did with Obama. And let me cue this up here. And I'd like you to go listen to this clip. Watch his eyes. Look at that. Okay. Whew. I thought I cut it off, but I just put it on hold. Okie dokie, let me see here. Obama. Okay, I was going to cue it up, but let me get this going here first.
Of the Jewish people that
I'm going to put it on hold. I having a difficult day. Let me see here. Okay, I sort of have it queued up, so I'm going to go ahead and play it. You keep going with the cards you have in your hands, right? Okay, let me see here.
Unfortunately, the debate online, especially on social media, is not that. It's can be very strident and dug in, and a lot of people fighting and talking past each other. I imagine there's a lot of people in this room or people listening at home who see what's happening, care deeply, want to be educated, want to participate in the conversation, but they're scared of saying the wrong thing, hurting someone's feelings unnecessarily, or just kind of not knowing enough to participate, and therefore they kind of tap out. What's your advice to people who want to participate in these debates that can feel so fraught about what the path forward is?
Look, I always say I probably wouldn't have been elected even to the Senate, and certainly not the presidency, had there not been this weird convergence with the internet and early social media. I was an outsider. I didn't have the backing of institutions and organizations, and there was so much power in seeing all these young voices being able to gather together from every walk of life. But you know, I'm dating myself now. It was mostly MySpace and Meetup. And I always, because I've been working a lot on social media issues and misinformation and now AI, I always point out, you know, the thing about Meetup was you had to meet up. Right? Because it's a pretty crude Flintstone tool, right? You send, it's like, hey, we're going to be in the church basement, you know, in Des Moines on Saturday, meet up. That was pretty much the extent of the technology.
Yeah, it's like a cork board.
And, but the reason I tell that story is that the power of meeting up is something that all of you will remember whenever we'd walk into a campaign office. Whatever your idea of what an Obama supporter was, when you got into the campaign office, just as was true if you went to a meetup meeting, is you've got a young black woman with a nose ring, and you've got some middle-aged white guy in a flannel shirt and a buzz cut who's a Army veteran, and you've got the Hispanic gay engineer, and the reason that was powerful was because you imagine at the first meetup meeting, okay, I've got an assumption about what an Obama supporter is. But then when I sit there, it turns out that that person's not actually completely like me. And if they're talking, that means that they've got some quirky ideas. And I promise you, you all know, we had some quirky volunteers. and had some who had some unexpected views that did not correspond to you know, the litmus test of progressivism, right? The reason I'm telling that story is because what that allowed was for all of us to see each other in their complexity and then still decide, all right, let's work together. And then they had to all go out and knock on doors and meet people who were even more quirky, right? So, going back to obviously a serious question, there's no way to avoid, in this particular moment on this particular issue, after so much blood has been spilt against the backdrop of this history. It doesn't matter whether it's online or in person. There is going to be rage and anger and not just generational traumas, right? I mean, this is century-old stuff that's coming to the fore, and you've witnessed the kind of worst cruelty and tragedy that can befall people involving children and spouses and grandparents, and passions are going to be high. But what I will say is that if there's any chance of us being able to act constructively to do something, it will require an admission of complexity and maintaining what on the surface may seem contradictory ideas. That what Hamas did was horrific, and there's no justification for it. And what is also true is that the occupation and what's happening to Palestinians is unbearable. And what is also true is that there is a history of the Jewish people that may be dismissed unless your grandparents or your great-grandparents or your uncle or your aunt tell you stories about the madness of anti-Semitism. And what is true is that there are people right now who are dying who have nothing to do with what Hamas did. And what is true, right? I mean, we can go on for a while. And the problem with the social media and trying to TikTok activism and trying to debate this on that is you can't speak the truth. You can pretend to speak the truth. You can speak one side of the truth. And in some cases, you can try to maintain your moral innocence by virtue of just grabbing that slice of the truth. But that won't solve the problem. And so if you want to solve the problem, then you have to take in the whole truth. And you then have to admit nobody's hands are clean, that all of us have are complicit to some degree. I look at this and I think back, what could I have done during my presidency?
This is by far the most psychopathic statement this dude has said so far. And let me back it up here a second so I don't talk over it.
And what is true, right? I mean, we can go on for a while. And the problem with the social media and trying to TikTok activism and trying to debate this on that, and even what I just said, which sounds very persuasive, still doesn't answer the fact of, all right, how do we prevent kids from being killed today? So, which is why in conversations that I've had with some of the young activists, I come with some humility and I say, look, I get why you might not want to look at history and context, and that's your primary concern. But the problem is that if you are dug in on that, well, the other side is dug in remembering the videos that Hamas took of what they did on 7th, and they're dug in too, and which means we will not stop those kids from dying. So my advice to young people who want to get involved, I guess it's not possible anymore to download Meetup.
Whatever it is.
but but approximate that. I would rather see you out there talking to people, including people who you disagree with. If you genuinely want to change this, then you've got to figure out how to speak to somebody on the other side and listen to them and understand
What I find so interesting about that, this is all I'm going to play of that clip, is this. They're always telling us things like that AOC and people, they're like, well, you guys got to go out in the streets and do this. Well, what exactly is your role here, Obama? Murderer in chief? I'm sorry, but I was never elected to office, so I take zero responsibility for all of this murder. And here's one of the comments. Obama is still one of our most popular presidents. God fucking help us all. This comment says, always tear up a bit when I see President Obama. The thought of once had and of what followed is so depressing. One other comment. I miss when America was good enough to elect this man twice. And one last one. I disagreed with a lot that he did, but by far the greatest president of the last 80 years. I missed just having a president that made it so I don't have to think about politics more than once every few years. No fear, just living life. Was proud to serve and honorably discharged from the Army with his signature. Well, a lot of people have fond memories about Obama. I do not share their fond memories. So I'm not going to get on a rampage about Obama. What I'm trying to point out to you is next time somebody pulls this and says that we're all responsible, somebody should get up and say, listen, buddy, I am not responsible. You are the one that created all of those murders all around the world in the name of the United States, based on tax dollars from those same citizens. So if anybody's going to be on the hook for this, it's going to be the psychopaths in charge of this country. So, I am going to close off for now. I have other things to concern myself with, like Babylon. This country is going down so fucking hard. I am just amazed every day that I wake up and we haven't been bombed, okay? I'm just literally amazed at the mayhem and carnage that this fucking country has rained down on the rest of the world. So, with that in mind, be safe out there and goodbye for now. Or as safe as you could possibly be living in this game show nightmare. Talk to you later.